Jackie Guthrie, member GUAC.
Scott Riggins, independent agricultural water pumper and member Pinal County GUAC.
Thank you. And okay, at this point, I would like Ms. Henningsen to go ahead and introduce the staff, the ADWR staff.
Thank you, Chair Snyder. So my name is Einab Henningsen, Active Management Area Director.
My name is Natalie Mast. I'm the program manager working on the management plans here at ADWR.
Carol Ward, Deputy Assistant Director, ADWR.
Kennedy Shepard, GUAC Coordinator.
Maggie Martin, Management Plan Specialist.
And just letting you all know that we are here in a conference room. There are about 5 of us. We are practicing social distancing, just so you all know, but we are going to change seats whenever it's someone else's turn to speak. So you'll see us rotating.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the reassurance. I was getting ready to put my mask on, knowing that all of you were assembled in one place, but I won't do that now. I did want to discuss just before we get underway a little bit of the process. Because this is a virtual meeting, as we reach a point in each of the agenda items where discussion is going to be invited, I will call upon members of the council first in alphabetical order for what that matters. To see if they have any comments or questions, and if appropriate, after that, I will throw it open to members of the public for input. We would like to have you register your interest in participating at that point by using the chat function, and I'm sure that you're all. In fact, I looking at the list of people who are logged in, you're all fluent in WebEx and virtual meetings, so I don't need to.
I would interrupt the chairman to say that I darn well certainly am not, and I'll do the best I can in this incredibly limited format.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Riggins, and we'll keep a close eye on your video feed, and when you leap up and wave your arms, we'll know you want to say something.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. The very first, now that we've, I'm sorry, Kennedy, did you want to add anything to the logistics of the webinar?
Yes, David. So kind of just reiterate what you said. We just have a few logistics we want to go over. So please remember to stay muted during the meeting if you are not speaking. We also ask that you mute your computer speakers, which can be found in the bottom right-hand corner, because if those are on, that can create a lot of audio feedback. Secondly, we do have a lot of items on our agenda today, so to ensure that we get to all of them, like what David said, if you do have any questions or comments pertaining to a specific agenda topic, please type it in the chat box, and we will address them in the order that they are posted. If you do want to speak, that can be a time during the call to public. So just type your name in the chat box and we will unmute you. Just give us a few seconds while we find your name and unmute you, and we will call on you and you can address the council. Finally, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, our help desk is available to you, and that number is 602-771-8444. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shepard. Okay. Item 3 on the GUAC's agenda is the Pinal AMA Stakeholder Group Update. We have one of the co-chairs, Jake Linderking, who will provide us with a brief summary and update of the group's activities. Linderking.
Chairman Snyder, members of the committee, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll try to be really brief in my comments here. You know, we've been meeting since December, and we've been meeting the first Monday of every month. And most recently, since we've all been kind of in this new homebound situation, the analysis holders had a technical group meeting a little while back. We've also started working the three, the chair, myself as a co-vice chair, and Bill Garfield, the chair, Supervisor Miller, have been meeting with DWR to try to continue to keep the ball moving. And we've had a little bit of forward momentum in the area of wells, and we're going to continue to meet. Next up is a stakeholder meeting on Monday, June 1st. It's next Monday at 10 a.m. It'll be a virtual meeting, and it'll be on Zoom. And we have 6 or 7 different things on the agenda coming up, but I think 2 notable ones is a presentation by Ashley Hollinger at the Water Resource Research Center and Babbitt Center for Land and Water Policy. She's going to present a little bit about the attributes of supply and demand and the Pinal AMA and the report they've been working on. We're also going to have a presentation by DWR on their draft substantive policy statement on prioritization of issued assured water supply demands. So we expect a pretty lively discussion on that topic. And if you do not have the meeting invitation information and would like to attend, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will make sure to get you the Zoom info. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lunderking.
Thank you.
Do any members of the council have a question for Mr. Lunderking? Mr. Collins?
Nope, I have no questions.
Ms. Guthrie? Who is?
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute. Jake, what time was the meeting Monday? Was that 10 o'clock?
10 o'clock, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Reagans?
No questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lunderking. We appreciate your making time in your day to provide us with the update.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Item 4 is the water management. I'm sorry, Kennedy, were there any questions from the audience?
Nope, none in our chat.
Okay, thank you. Item 4 is the Water Management Assistance Program, otherwise known as WMAP. We will have Ms. Henningsen lead us off with the updates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the council, and everyone on the webinar. I'll ask Maggie to move on 1 slide, please. Actually, 2 slides. So I'll start with the table, the upper table you see in front of you on the screen, which breaks down Pinal AMA withdrawal fees for the past 5 years. It includes withdrawal fee rates, the amount collected for the different components of the fee, as well as the total rates and total money collected for each year. So far for 2019 annual reporting season, about $230,000 were collected for the Water Management Assistance Program. About $1.15 million were collected for the water bank, and a total amount collected stands at about $1.43 million. I'm sure you all know that annual reports are due on March 31st, but because we recognize the challenges that COVID-19 brought to many people and entities, the director decided to waive any annual report late fees until June 26th to allow people the time to get back to normal and report their annual reports. So we do expect some additional monies to be received in the next few weeks. Currently, there is about $236,000 in the Water Management Assistance Program account. After we deduct the committed monies, which are $135,000, and this is, by the way, for programs that we support and already have a contract with us, but the money still haven't been delivered because we didn't receive all the deliverables for those contracts. So after we remove that amount of money to those 3 ongoing projects, we're looking at about $101,000 remaining as available funds. So the 3 ongoing projects that we have, and they're listed in the bottom, and I'm going to talk about them in a little bit. Those 3 projects that are supported by the Water Management System Program, ADWR, and the GOEC for several years are Pinal County Water Augmentation Authority, the Irrigation Management Services, and the Natural Resource Education Center. And those 3 projects are totaling at $350,000 per year. The Water Management Assistance Program fee collected in the past several years, as you can see at the top of the table, hasn't been sufficient in the past several years to sustain those 3 projects on an ongoing and a sustainable manner. So in order to keep the 3 current programs fully funded, GOEC members made their recommendation last year to maintain the fees for 2020 at $3, however, increasing the Water Management Assistance Program fee a little bit from 50 cents to 65 cents and setting the new groundwater and irrigation efficiency at 2.35. So we would hopefully in the next few years would have that enough money to sustain all of those 3 projects in fully funded manner. So just to talk a little bit about the projects and where we are, so our programs, a $200,000 payment to support PICWA's 2020 fiscal year activities has been issued just recently, earlier this week. The Irrigation Management Service contract actually expired in January 2020. We were supposed to discuss renewal of that project in our previous meeting that unfortunately got canceled. So to prevent the program from closing its doors and knowing that Pinal GOEC has supported this program for many years, the director did decide to make a one-time decision to renew the project before receiving the recommendation to renew for the, from the GOEC. We will next hear from Eddie about the IMS program manager about the program, even though you would not ask to vote on recommending renewal. And he will tell us a little bit about the accomplishment that they had last year and the goals for next year's program. And finally, we have the Natural Resource Education Center, and their contract is about to expire soon, so in July 31st. And we'll also hear, after we hear from Eddie, we'll hear from Jennifer Salcido, who is the program manager for the Natural Resources Education Center, and we'll hear from her about some of the center's activities this past year and their planned work for the upcoming year. For this project specifically, the GOEC members will then be asked to recommend renewal for this program. So before I move on, does any of the members may have questions about anything that is listed on this slide?
Thank you, Ms. Henningsen. Let me ask Mr. Collins, do you have any questions or comments for Ms. Henningsen?
Yes, I do. Under encumbered and committed, it says 135,000, but I don't see how that works with 120,000 or the 30,000. How is that encumbrance arrived at?
So currently we have $120,000 encumbered for the irrigation management services. We are just now in the process of signing the contract, so the project just started and we still haven't delivered any funds. We're waiting. So usually how the programs will go is that we would receive a deliverable from the entity that we're contracted with, and for that deliverable we'll issue a certain amount of fund as agreed upon in the contract. So out of the $135,000, $120,000 is dedicated for the irrigation management services for this upcoming year. We also have another final deliverable for the Natural Resources Education Center in the sum of $15,000, and that would be given to Natural Resource Education Center whenever we receive their final deliverable at the end of July, and that brings us to $135,000. Does that explain it?
Yes, thank you, Anav.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Ms. Guthrie?
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Riggins? Mr. Riggins unmuted?
Did you hear me?
No. Please proceed.
Oh, I'm sorry. No questions.
Thank you. All right. We now have a presentation by Mr. Enriquez.
So, Mr. Snyder, if you don't mind, I have just one thing I would like to add very briefly, just to keep you all updated on the groundwater conservation grant update. So before we move on to Eddie, if you may, sir.
Please proceed.
Minky, would you mind progressing the, excellent. So just so you're aware, and I'm sure you recall that earlier this year, the legislators appropriated $2 million in additional funding to support groundwater conservations in the AMA. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of update where we are in the progress for that and the process. So these monies will be utilized within the Water Management and System Program Fund, although they'll be tracked differently or separately, and they're divided among the AMAs on a per capita basis. As you know, Pinal AMA will be receiving $150,000 to fund those projects. So we received 5 applications for the Pinal AMA, as you can see in that sheet. 1 from the U of A Arizona Project West, 3 from Arizona Water Company, and 1 from Maricopa Stanfield Irrigation and Drainage District. I'm not going to go over these, you can read them. We're also going to post all of the application packets on our WMAP webpage, and you have the link at the bottom of that slide. So in the next few days, you'll be able to read the whole application packet if you're interested. But I just wanted to remind council members that during the next GOAC meetings, which we'll try to schedule sometime towards the end of June or beginning of July, the applicants will present on their proposed projects, and GOAC members will have to prioritize the projects according to the AMA needs and funding available. That prioritized list will then go to ADWA director, who will then make the final decision on the funding distribution. And that's all I wanted to say about that topic. I can take any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Questions from council? Mr. Collins?
I have none, thank you.
Ms. Guthrie?
No questions.
Mr. Riggins?
No questions.
Thank you. Ms. Henningsen, since the total requests equal 248,000 and change, but there's only 150 that's available, are any of these projects scalable? In other words, if we like 3 projects, but they total more than 150, are some of those projects able to reduce themselves in scope to somehow allow for more awards?
So at this point, we are going to keep the projects as they are. It's going to be very tricky to pick and choose different parts of different applications, and it may minimize the impact or eliminate the impact, the positive impact of the project. So at that point, we're looking at keeping the projects as they are, with the amount of funding they request and with the proposed work that they are that they specified in the application.
Okay, all or nothing.
All or nothing.
Thank you very much. Then we'll now move on to a report by Mr. Enriquez.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello. I'm going to start off with the BMP program as part of our IMS program itself. This past year in 2019, we signed up 3 farms, totaling 169 farms to date, 189,000 acres. Throughout the year, I met periodically with BMP cooperators throughout this quarter. Collected verification information which is their farming practices. Also did BMP lease transfers, which is basically going through the same application process, filling out when a farmer leaves that farm and somebody else picks up the lease, I got to go through and set up the BMPs according to the way they work their farm, their tillage practices and all their practices. So it's a full process again. I usually average about between 5 and 10 different farms every year that we have to go back and do paperwork for. As for deliverables this past year, I did 4 turf evaluations on some turf farms and local parks. We go out there, do a irrigation evaluation. We do an irrigation evaluation, write out a report, hand it to the farmer, the city, whoever we work with, come back and fix anything that we saw on there, come back and do a second evaluation as a follow-up to that. We did 14 standard evaluations on farms, 14 single evaluations with a follow-up. Same concept as with doing with the turf. We go out, pick a field, do a full evaluation, let them know what their efficiencies are, find out what worked and what didn't work, make some recommendations, and then come back and try to use those recommendations and see where it's at. If that didn't work, we do a third one. We just keep going until we figure it out to where it needs to be. We did 6 seasonal evaluations. It's where we work with the farmer throughout the year and collect information, do evaluations, collect information, and then do a full seasonal evaluation on that crop. And we collect we use information from the University of Arizona, all the resources, internet, all the resources that we can get to put together as good of a report as possible for them. We also use that same process for irrigation water management with the natural resource NRCS. When somebody gets an EQIP program, they have to do irrigation water management, and we go ahead and do that for them and help them do their reporting so that they can get their funding. This past year, like I said, we met with all cooperators in March for a BMP workshop. Our workshops, basically, we would go through and review all of their practices the previous year, look at the evaluations that we did, look at what's going to happen the following year, and then we also help them fill out the scheduled BMP, which is part of their annual report, and dust control, anything else that they have, any questions that we can assist them, we go ahead and take care of it right there and then. We schedule evaluations for the upcoming year. Throughout the year, we do BMP data verifications. It's where we go out and everything that the farmers said that they were going to do as part of their application, we go out and verify. We go out and verify when they're land leveling, when they're doing their tillage work, on the irrigations, anything that they need help on verifying, we go ahead and do that. We also attended 2 cotton field days. We worked with our sister company, which is the Education Center. We go out there and help them with weed control, tillage, planting, and irrigation. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we work with the NRCS office and do IWM for them, irrigation water management. This upcoming year, it's going to be a tough one because of the COVID. We still continue to go out and do our work. And with funding being behind a little bit, it's going to be really tough. But we'll get through it. Our plans are the same for next year. We're going to try to do a little more in-depth, workshops, do brochures and information guides and stuff like that for farmers this next year. We're going to update all our stuff. And that's basically what I got for you guys today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Enriquez. Any quick questions from members of the council? Mr. Collins?
Yes, Eddie, can you identify the 4 turf entities you worked with?
I did. I worked with Foster or Western Sod. I did some stuff with them, and then the city of Casa Grande. I went out and worked with their grounds crew on multiple parks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Guthrie?
No questions, Chairman Snyder.
Thank you. Mr. Riggins?
No questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Enriquez.
Thank you.
Good job. We appreciate all you do.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Jennifer Salcido, the NREC, or Natural Resources Education Center.
Good morning, Mr. Snyder, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. And good
Okay,
morning.
great. Good morning. Thank you, members of the council, members of the public, and guests. I'm Jennifer Salcido, Director of the Natural Resource Education Center. I thank you for inviting me today to be part of this meeting. My goal for this presentation is to give you a brief overview of what NREC is, what NREC has accomplished this year, and what our plans are for next year. So, what is natural resource education? Well, to most, it's known as NREC. Next slide. NREC is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to nurture an awareness of natural and renewable natural resources. NREC was started in 1996. For 23 years and going strong, NREC has provided education about natural resources to students and adults of Pinal County. There's other NRCS-sponsored ed programs in the state, but NREC is known to be unique, really one of a kind in its offerings and programming. Next slide. NREC is sponsored by 3 natural conservation districts: the Eloy Natural Resource Conservation District, the Florence Coolidge Natural Resource Conservation District, and the West Pinal Natural Resource Conservation District. NREC is overseen by the Arizona State Land Department as well. Although NREC is sponsored by the 3 NRCDs, it's imperative to secure additional funding to continue to provide quality programming. NREC staff is continually working to secure and maintain grants. Next slide. NREC's grantors and partners include the Arizona Department of Water Resources, Central Arizona Project, Salt River Project, the John F. Long Foundation, Waste Management, and Pinal 40. Next slide. NREC's goal is to educate people of all ages in Pinal County about natural resources, ways to conserve natural resources, ways to manage natural resources, and how to keep natural resources available for future generations. Next slide. The Natural Resource Education Center reaches the community twofold. The Natural Resource Education staff conduct classroom visits, and we also provide on-site field trips. Next slide. NREC has developed 6 farm field ag venture programs that are offered each year. We have the Veggie Ventures program, the Water Out West, also known as WOW, Ag Ventures Corn Festival, From Alfalfa to Ice Cream, 5 Seas of Arizona, and Let's Get Crackin' Egg program. Each one of these programs is a hands-on field trip experience or classroom experience. It's age appropriate, meets many STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics standards, as well as Arizona State educational standards. Teachers are asked to give an evaluation of the program after each presentation. And a consistent comment is from many teachers is, thanks for covering standards that are oftentimes hard to cover in the classroom. Next slide. So what has NREC been up to this year? As far as deliverables, during the 2019-2020 school year, NREC provided free programs to 3,326 students and 244 adults. And I have to emphasize the free part. There's no cost to attend our programs or for us to come in and visit classrooms. Those 3,326 students equates to 8,690 hours of conservation and agricultural education. And as we all know, COVID-19 had other plans for us this year, and NREC was forced to cancel 11 field trips, unfortunately, and classroom visits. So those 11 presentations would have equated to an additional 770 students reached at approximately 3,465 educational hours. Next slide. So what is ADWR's grant support? We're proud to partner with ADWR, and we're so grateful for your continued support. Next slide. So ADWR supports specifically one of NREC's 6 programs, our Water Out West program, our WOW program. And NREC is continually revamping the curriculum for 5th graders as Arizona State standard educational standards change and STEM requirements change. We're building on information they learned during their 4th grade interaction with Project WET. And our Water Out West program is a unique program throughout Arizona because it can be a field trip experience or a mobile traveling presentation. Next slide. The Water Out West WOW program is a 4.5-hour hands-on program where students are exposed to information about, you can see in the slide, they're exposed to the water cycle, water movement and management, Arizona watersheds, Arizona's water history and conservation efforts. We have our rolling rivers water trailers and our differing irrigation practices. Next slide. NREC's really grateful for ADWR's support of our rolling rivers mobile trailers. These are always a hit of the program. These trailers are used for field trips at our facility and are taken on the road for presentations. You can see on the trailers there in the pictures that we proudly display our sponsors and supporters. Our trailers are kind of in need of some maintenance, including some new water pumps that run those trailers and some tire maintenance, and we do need 1 new cover. We actually have 2 trailers. Next slide. ADWR also helps support our classrooms. NREC facilities are leased from and located at Central Arizona College. Our facilities consist of our 2 NREC buildings. In these buildings, we have 2 classrooms. We have an outside patio for presentations and lunches. We have a cow palace, which houses Maybell, our milking and talking cow. We also have 4 acres of irrigated land, which is used for our cornfield for our corn festival in the fall, and for veggies for our Veggie Ventures program in the spring, and for many conservation and ag-related demonstrations. We work with Eddie Enriquez with IMS to maintain these fields. Next slide. I'd like to introduce you to our Rockstar teaching team. I'm Jennifer Salcedo, and we also have Jan Zapata, Laura Lee Wirtz, and Carolyn Harbison. And they've been with our program for quite a while. 3 of us are certified teachers in the state of Arizona. Next slide. Other expenses for our program include, of course, resource materials, classroom supplies, office supplies, internet, Wi-Fi, which is really important these days, our accountant. Next slide. Because there's so many unknowns for next year, NREC is really diligently working this summer to modify and adapt to our programs to meet students and schools' needs, ongoing changing needs. NREC will have to modify for COVID-19 restrictions. The CDC just came out with guidelines for reopening the school, and who knows what that's going to look like in Pinal County. So we're hopeful. We're very hopeful. In the meantime, we are going to be producing online video presentations for our programs. So all of our programs can be videoed. We can put those online on the internet for teachers to access. And then hopefully we can gather up some kits and materials to follow up with those classrooms and do some video chatting and conferencing with those classrooms after they've done the videos and used the materials. And some of our programs can be transitioned into mobile programs that we can take to the schools. Unfortunately, we don't know yet if we're going to be allowed on campus. But again, we're hopeful. So we will be prepared and ready when that time comes. And of course, like I mentioned before, we will be conducting Zoom presentations and meetings with classrooms. It's going to look very different. And as the unknown approaches, we're excited though. Excited with where this might take us. So I'm confident with NREC's committed staff and resources that we're up to the challenge. We're going to be thinking outside the box to deliver these important programs to our county. Next slide. On behalf of the Natural Resource Education Center, I'd like to give a big thank you to the Arizona Department of Water Resources for your generous support of our program, and we ask for your continued support of our program. This concludes my presentation, and I can answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Acedo. NREC is an exemplary program, and I can assure you, having a connection with the local school district, that they are all hands on deck trying to answer the same questions you are. So yeah, there's a lot of people in the same boat.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Let me now ask if there are questions or comments from any member of the council. Mr. Collins?
Yes, Jennifer, do you have programs that target the junior high or high school level?
Currently, we do not. Our programs are designed for K through 5th, but with our, moving forward in this different direction.
We've lost you, Jennifer.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
Okay. Currently, our programs are designed kindergarten through 5th grade. But as we've been talking this summer and the way that things are moving, especially digitally, there's no reason for us not to expand into middle school.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Ms. Guthrie?
Thank you, Jennifer. I always enjoy what you've done the previous year with all kids. It's great.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Mr. Riggins?
Yes, again, a very well done job, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Very, very important program for both Pinal AMA and also for the state of Arizona. There's so little that actually tries to show people that aren't associated with agriculture and natural resource conservation really what goes on the ground. And it's a vital function that you serve. And thank you again for your efforts the same.
Thank you. We appreciate your support.
And I would like to chime in addition to saying laudatory things, I do want you to keep an eye on that Laura Lee Wirtz. She's a troublemaker. So.
Oh, well, she keeps us on our toes. Yes.
I'm sure she does. It's a fantastic program, and I continue to hear from our teachers and from the kids They look forward to the programming every year, and we wish you every continued success in the coming year, however it unrolls.
Thank you.
Okay.
David, would,
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr.
I
Carpenter.
just want to remind you that it's up to you if you would like to vote on renewing that program for the next year. So if
Yes,
you would
David,
like to take that vote.
Yes.
David, this is Bill. I would like to make a motion to go and renew that program for the upcoming year in the dollar amount as the previous year.
And Jackie will second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Mr. Collins?
I have none.
Ms. Guthrie?
No further discussion.
Mr. Riggins?
No discussion on the motion.
Okay, I will then call the question. I will do it by roll call to make sure that we have it all. Mr. Collins?
Aye.
Ms. Guthrie?
Aye.
Mr. Riggins?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You are entirely welcome, and we wish the NREC folks all the best. Now move
Thank you,
to
committee.
agenda item number 5, which is the Governor's Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Council efforts. And that would be Deputy Director Mrs. Ward. Please
Oh,
proceed.
good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the council, and all of you who have gathered for today's webinar. I appreciate it, and thank you too, Mr. Chair, for for making me Deputy Director. Actually, I'm Deputy Assistant Director, just for the record. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I've attended the Phoenix AMA GUAC meetings for decades. This is actually my very first Pinal GUAC meeting, so it's a pleasure to join you all today. As Einav said, I'm going to provide you with an update on the Governor's Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Council. I'll refresh you on the council's background, and then I'll mostly focus on the work that the committees are doing today. And if you could bring up the presentation for me and move on to my first slide, please. Thank you. So you may recall that the council's story begins with the drought contingency plan. As critically important as the Colorado River is to Arizona, the governor and the water community are keenly aware that there is more work to be done to address the state's water issues. In recognition of that, the council was established by executive order concurrent with the historic signing of the legislation ratifying the drought contingency plan. Next slide, please. So the new council replaces the Governor's Water Augmentation Council, which was established in 2015. It expands on the foundation laid by the preceding council, increasing the focus of its efforts and further strengthening engagement. The council is a forum for discussion of water issues. It brings together a diverse group of stakeholders from across the state to raise, analyze, discuss, and vet what are often difficult, complex issues in an effort to ensure a sustainable water future. The council continues the legacy of cooperative, long-term, strategic water planning in Arizona. Through the council and its committees, stakeholders from across the water use sectors are encouraged to confront difficult issues and to work collaboratively to identify and develop solutions to water challenges faced by communities throughout the state. Next slide, please. So the council is charged with a number of things, most significantly, identifying and recommending opportunities for water augmentation, innovation, and conservation. The council is also tasked with providing guidance on issues to the director of ADWR upon the director's request. Next slide. The council consists of individuals appointed by the governor. These individuals come from a diversity of organizations and backgrounds, including watershed groups, government, nonprofits, academia, and Arizona agriculture, mining, and home building. In order to enable discussions that need to occur among diverse stakeholders and legislators in order to achieve good policy outcomes, several members of the Arizona State Legislature were specifically added to the council by executive order. The director of the Department of Water Resources serves as the chair of the council. Next slide, please. The council meets quarterly. At the March 13th meeting, the council began a process to discuss tribal water rights and settlements with a background presentation. A meeting to enable tribal communities and others to present their perspectives has been on hold due to COVID-19, but we expect to return to this topic soon. Comments on the draft council annual report were due from council members on May 18th. We are currently addressing those comments and beginning layout work for the final draft of the report. That final draft will go to the council for another review on June 9th. The upcoming meeting of the council is scheduled for June 23rd. Next slide. The council's committees, where much of the work of the council is accomplished, includes council members as well as non-council members. Participation in the committee meetings is open to the public. There is no formal membership. Committee meetings to date have been held both in person and online to enable participation from stakeholders across the state. The committees work to identify and discuss issues and to develop, evaluate, and prioritize recommendations for the council to consider. There are currently 4 committees. I'll touch briefly on each of them and what they are working on. Next slide, please. The purpose of the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee is to identify and explore methods of augmenting water supplies in Arizona. In 2019, the committee released the report Long-Term Water Augmentation Options for Arizona, which offers a suite of potential options tailored to each of the state's 22 planning areas. The committee recently met on May 22nd and heard presentations on cloud seeding, forest and grassland management, and on phreatophyte management as additional potential augmentation strategies for the state. The committee is considering what research may be needed on these strategies and how viable these strategies may be as a means to augment supply in Arizona. In addition to this, a technical working group, the Water Storage Sites Criteria Subcommittee, was formed in January of 2020 to recommend site selection criteria for the revision of the 2017 Potential Water Storage Sites on State Trust Land Report. Next slide, please. The Desalination Committee works to evaluate and overcome barriers to desalination projects and identify opportunities to assist in developing potential projects. In the latter half of 2019, the committee created the Desalination Regulatory and Legal Subcommittee as a technical group to identify and further examine issues in selected areas. Over the course of the past year, the committee has largely focused on the exploration and discussion of challenges and opportunities involved in the use and desalination of brackish groundwater. At the committee's request, DWR staff compiled a brief overview of permitting requirements for waste brine disposal for use by stakeholders. Comments on this draft are due on May 29th. The committee is considering information on the Yuma desalting plant and benefits to Central Arizona's Colorado River supply from operation of the plant. The committee has spent time exploring existing projects, cutting-edge desal technologies, and alternatives for brine disposal, and has expressed interest in investigating innovative financing strategies for projects. There is no date yet set for the next meeting of this group, but it will be coming soon. Next slide, please. The non-AMA Groundwater Committee was established to address groundwater issues outside of the active management areas. Committee participants identified issues and concerns relating to groundwater use as topics for discussion. Next slide. They have tentatively narrowed the list to 4 categories of topics and issues for further discussion: groundwater management strategies, data needs, best management practices and education, and well monitoring or measuring and reporting. A full listing of topics identified is available on the Council's page on the ADWR website. To date, most of the committee's meetings have been largely informational in nature as they first sought to gain an understanding of the status of groundwater supplies outside the AMAs, the data that are available, and the data gaps that exist. The committee will be taking on the topic of irrigation non-expansion areas, or INAs, at their upcoming meeting, which is also yet to be scheduled. We'll be working to set a date soon for that. Next slide, please. The committee that likely holds the most interest for all of you is the Post-2025 AMAs Committee, which is focused on identifying challenges within Arizona's AMAs and generating strategies and solutions beyond 2025. The committee began the work of identifying challenges in October of 2019 and will continue the process of issue identification and analysis throughout 2020. The committee plans to have a consensus-based list of issues, each described in an issue brief, to bring to the Council for consideration and discussion no later than December 2020 Council meeting. The issue briefs are meant to describe succinctly, in a straightforward manner, why each of these issues is a challenge for the AMAs. They are only intended to describe the issues at this point, not to analyze them or begin to suppose any solutions. Once there is consensus around the issues and the priorities, and there is support from the Council, work to develop solutions will begin in 2021. The committee drafted the first 3 issue briefs, solicited input, and based on that feedback, has further refined the drafts. The drafts were shared and discussed at the May 26th meeting of the Post-2025 AMAs Committee. The timeline for this committee is an optimistic one. There is a lot of work ahead. The chairs, their staffs, DWR staff, and the committee participants are working hard to meet it. I'll note that there is a considerable connection between the work of the 2025 group and the 5th Management Plans Work Group, and of course all of this is tied into the AMAs, so Einav, Natalie, and I and our teams work closely and communicate a great deal about all of this. There is great similarity in the work that we do as well, particularly in that we rely on all of you to be engaged and to communicate with us and with one another in order to build the strategies and the policies to work towards balancing supply and demand so that our communities and our economy continue to thrive well beyond 2025. Next slide, please. The new Council made notable progress in its inaugural year, and we're making progress with the research and the 5th Management Plan work groups. But as I keep hinting, we have a long way to go, and we need a lot of input yet. We know we're asking a lot of the same people all the time, and we appreciate all that you keep giving. We'd like to take some pressure off of you and expand the bench a bit. As we're starting this effort with the 2025 committee, it seems a bit heavier on municipal representation and Phoenix and Tucson AMA representation. There are 5 AMAs, and they aren't all homogeneous. We need to hear from the Pinal AMA and from agriculture and from industry in these meetings. We'd like to see if we can improve the mix of representation, especially now that our meetings are virtual. And we're hoping it's a little easier now that our meetings are virtual. Maybe there's a little bit of a silver lining here. And so we'd like to invite, if you can think of anyone who would be a good addition to the 5th Management Plan work groups or the 2025 committee, or actually any of our stakeholder groups, please let us know. We would be happy to introduce ourselves. We genuinely value the input that the GUACs provide as well. I'd like to thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak with all of you today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions that you and the members of the council may have.
Thank you, Ms. Ward. Let me, as usual, let me throw it to council members first. Mr. Collins,
I have no questions.
Ms. Guthrie,
No questions.
Mr. Riggins.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Snyder. Ms. Ward, in light of the enormous number of critical public decision points and issues that we have to confront over the next several years, the public policy and the public interaction that needs to be performed, I was curious, as we're moving forward at an indeterminate fashion, not knowing exactly how the current pandemic will play out, but assuming that at some point it will, I was wondering when there was any kind of aspects and thoughts towards returning to a traditional public meeting format to be able to address these in ways that recognizes the importance of public participation in these meetings.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Riggins, for that question, Mr. Chair, members of the council. It sounds like, Mr. Riggins, you're asking when we might expect to reconvene in person, and that's a hard thing to take a stab at this point. We're following the governor's lead on this and how they roll out the phases as they return to business. So as soon as we're able, we too are anxious to return to those face-to-face meetings. We recognize how valuable that interaction is. We're grateful for the interaction that we have been able to have via these webinars, and that everyone has been as willing as they have, and as tremendously engaged as they have in these webinar formats, allowing us to continue the work that we have. We know this is difficult, it's challenging, it has been for our staff, and we know it is for all of you, but everybody seems to understand the work that we have ahead of us is also critical. So I guess the answer to your question is, as soon as we are able to return to work based on the governor's recommendations, we'll certainly be doing the in-person meetings again.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Look forward to seeing you in person again. We do.
Ward, this is Chairman Snyder. I did want to point out that I have been a participant of the post-2025 committee meetings and working with Mr. Tenney in particular. I was unable to participate in the last meeting, but I assure you that the Pinal AMA is very interested and will continue to participate. Part of the challenge, I mean, you've noted that the usual suspects are assembled around the table with great frequency or around the WebEx. The demands on all of us are increasingly intense. With other things going on in virtual formats, et cetera. So it is sometimes a time management issue. But I assure you that the Pinal AMA's GUAC members will be there. We will participate as we have in the past. So,
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, we greatly appreciate that commitment.
Are there any other questions from council members for Ms. Ward? If not, then Kennedy, do we have any members of the public comments?
No questions from the public at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ward.
A pleasure.
We'll now transition to agenda item 6, which is Ms. Natalie Mast, who is going to review and discuss the draft Pinal AMA's 4th management plan, including changes from the 3rd management plan and next steps.
All right. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the council. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Maggie. So my name is Natalie Mast. I am the program manager for the working on the management plans here at ADWR. Thank you for having me today, and I think we have a lot of interesting information to go through today, so we'll get right into it. We did publish a draft Pinal AMA 4th management plan in March. So that has been available on our website. Council members, I know all of you were alerted via email of that publication. So that has been available for a couple months now. I'm going to talk through what the management plans are, just for a little bit of background, where we are with the management plans, and then I'll provide some information on the changes that we have between the 3rd and 4th management plans in this draft. After that, I will also provide a little bit of information on the work that we're doing for the 5th management plan. So we'll go ahead and get right into it. If you could go to the next slide, please, Maggie. So the management plans, many of you, this will be a review, but just to provide some background, the management plans were created under the Groundwater Management Act in 1980. That Groundwater Management Act created a tiered structure for groundwater regulation across the state of Arizona. On a statewide level, if you look at kind of the first portion of this slide, statewide, all wells need to be registered. There are community water systems for municipal providers. And at the next level, a slightly higher level of regulation, we have irrigation non-expansion areas. So those first provisions apply, and also there are monitoring and reporting requirements and a prohibition on the expansion of irrigated acres in those areas. The active management areas are our highest level of groundwater regulation and also groundwater protection in this system. So in the active management areas, in the AMAs, we have, again, those initial requirements that I went through, but also we have management goals and management plans and conservation programs, and a whole suite of other protections that apply, protections and conservation measures that apply for the active management areas. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Each active management area has a management goal. 4 out of our 5 AMAs do have a safe yield type of goal. So a lot of times you'll hear us focus on safe yield as this management goal across the state, across the active management areas. Pinal, as we all know, has a very different type of goal, and that is not related to safe yield. So the management goal of the Pinal AMA is to allow development of non-irrigation uses and to preserve the existing agricultural economies as long as feasible. So kind of a 2-part goal there that is a little bit complex to evaluate. We'll talk about that a little bit more further on in the presentation here, but it's important to recognize that the Pinal AMA is a very unique AMA in a lot of ways and does have this different goal than the other AMAs. If we could go to the next slide. So the statutes indicate that we should have a management plan for each management period, and that those management plans should contain conservation programs designed to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. This is one of the major tools that we have to work toward those goals that I just mentioned. Again, these management plans are to contain conservation programs designed to reduce withdrawals of groundwater, and that reduction in withdrawals of groundwater is how we work toward that goal in the other AMAs and also in the Pinal AMA. We reduce withdrawals of groundwater in order to extend that agricultural economy, in order to preserve future water supplies for non-irrigation uses. That same framework applies for all of the AMAs. So that's something that you'll hear me talk a lot about in the context of the 4th management plans and also in the 5th management plans is that kind of guiding principle, that checkbox that all of this needs to check, which is reductions in withdrawals of groundwater. If we could, go to the next slide, please. This slide shows a very general overview of kind of what our statutory requirements are for the management plans. You can see going across the top of the chart there, we have each of our management plans. The management plans were, as that statute said that I pointed out earlier, we have a series of management plans. These are successive management plans intended to be iterative, intended to build upon each other so that we have increasingly stringent conservation requirements over the successive management plans. And you can kind of see that in the way that the statutes were structured, that we added in additional management tools and additional structures over time over the course of those 5 management plans. So I'm not going to go too far into the details of all of this today, but you can see that there are a number of different options and methods and shalls and mays that are built into the statutory structure for the management plans. There are a number of things that we have to include in the management plans, and there are a number of things that we have the option to include in the management plans as additional groundwater management tools. So thank you, Maggie. So the management plans are structured to contain both a broad range of supporting information and also regulatory information. So your chapters 4, 5, 6, and 8 contain your regulatory mandatory conservation programs for each of your 3 sectors, and then also for storage and recovery. What you'll find in the management plan, something that's really important to note, is that the actual regulatory language, the legally enforceable language for each conservation program is contained in italicized language at the end of those relevant chapters. So that's kind of the important language there. If there's ever a question about what it is that the program actually says about the details there, we always refer back to that italicized language at the end of those chapters. But apart from that italicized language, there's also a very broad range of hydrologic information, historical data, other types of analysis, and strategy discussions contained in those management plans and you can kind of see in that text, in that narrative, our thought process around why we are structuring these things the way we are and what we see for these active management areas, for the Pinal active management area going forward. So you can go to the next slide, please. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we do have chapters for each sector. So chapter 4 is the agricultural chapter, 5 is municipal, 6 is industrial. These are your kind of heavy hitter chapters. These are the chapters that I personally refer to most often. These chapters contain the conservation programs for these 3 sectors, the regulatory requirements for the water use for those water users, reporting requirements, targets, flexibility provisions, all of the details of those conservation programs are contained in those chapters. In addition to that background information that I mentioned before, we also have historical water use data and a number of other types of analyses contained in those chapters. Okay, we could go to the next. So where are we with the 4th and 5th management plans? So the statutes were designed, the intent of the Groundwater Management Act was that the management periods would match up with the management plans. The 4th management period was defined in statute as being from 2010 to 2020, and we're behind. For a lot of reasons, we fell behind, but we are actively working to adopt the remaining 4th management plans that we have yet to complete and to begin the development of the 5th management plans. So back in March, we adopted the Phoenix Active Management Area 4th Management Plan. And we also, in March, published the initial draft for the Pinal AMA 4th Management Plan. We intend to publish an initial draft for the Santa Cruz AMA 4th Management Plan in the coming weeks here. So that information for that AMA will also be forthcoming. At the same time, we have established a process for the development of the 5th management plans. I'm not going to go into too much detail here about this. I'll provide a little additional detail later in the presentation. But our target here for the 5th management plans is to have those conservation programs become effective on January 1st, 2025. Thanks, Becky. So we have a lot of debate about the specifics of any given portion of the statutes and the conservation programs, but very generally, there's broad agreement that our state is in a better place today because of the Groundwater Management Act. So what I'm going to go through now is a little bit of that historical data that I keep talking about. Where are we today? What progress have we made so far? So if we could go, thank you. So many of you will have seen this chart many times before. What we see here is the blue line is water use on a statewide basis over time. The kind of reddish-orange line is our population growth over time, and the gray bars in the back are our gross domestic income over time. So what you can see is that water use was increasing pretty significantly up until the point of the passage of that Groundwater Management Act in 1980. And we really count this as a success of awareness about conservation, awareness about water use, and these conservation regulations and management programs that we put into place. At that point in 1980, you see a shift in the directionality of that water use, and you see it come down so that we are using about the same amount of water today as we were back in 1957, even though we've had very, very significant population growth and very, very significant economic growth over that same time period. So that chart, though, is at a statewide level. Inside the AMAs, we have additional tools to manage our water supplies. And this is where the management plans come in. The management plans are one of our tools for managing groundwater supplies inside the active management areas. As I mentioned before, the design is incremental. It's successive, so that each successive management plan contains more stringent conservation requirements so that we're gradually increasing those conservation requirements over time. And we can see that in each of the AMAs, including the Pinal AMA, we've had some success over time in finding conservation in the different areas. One example that we've included on this slide here is the example of GPCD. Despite very significant growth in the population of the Pinal AMA, there has been a decrease in the GPCD of the municipal providers over time. So those providers are finding conservation, they're finding efficiency over time, despite having very, very significant growth. If we could go to the next slide. Sorry, I lost my place here. All right. So what I want to do here is just talk a little bit about the Pinal EMA. The Pinal EMA is unique. I know you all know that, and I'm sure you could all tell me much of the details about how the Pinal EMA is unique. But what I want to display here is how the water use characteristics of the Pinal EMA are unique. So if you look on the left-hand side of this chart, what we're looking at is total water demand by sector. The first bar is statewide, the second bar is all of the AMAs combined, and the third bar is the Pinal AMA. So what you see is that agricultural demand in the Pinal AMA makes up a much larger portion, a much larger percentage of the total water demand for this AMA as compared to statewide water use, as compared to water use in the AMAs in general. You can see that that's kind of duplicated, broken out a little bit, so you can see it a little bit easier on that chart on the right side. So what you see, again, is total water demand by sector in the order of agricultural, municipal, industrial, and then estimates for tribal water use as well. So the total water demand is in the Pinal AMA is really dominated by agriculture, although we have seen growth in some of the other sectors over time. When we look at just groundwater use, so those previous charts were total water use, all sources. This chart is just groundwater use, and again, we're showing statewide, and then, so the top line is statewide groundwater use, the middle line is all of the AMA's groundwater use aggregated, and that bottom line is the Pinal AMA groundwater use. So what you can see here is kind of on a general level, on a statewide level, we have been reducing our groundwater use over time. There were big reductions kind of as compared to the 50s and 60s, which is at the beginning of this chart. But a lot of those improvements have really leveled off over time. And while you can see some reductions on the AMA-wide basis, the total groundwater use in the Pinal AMA has remained pretty flat and may actually have seen some increases in more recent years. Thank you. So this is just a look at the Pinal AMA management goal. So as I mentioned, we want to reduce withdrawals of groundwater in order to preserve the agricultural economies as long as feasible, as well as preserving water supplies for future non-irrigation uses. So while the management goal of the Pinal AMA is not safe yield, it can be useful to think about safe yield or overdraft in the context of this goal. If we are reducing withdrawals of groundwater in order to preserve this water, then how much water are we mining? Can we slow the amount of overdraft in order to further stretch those supplies? So what this chart displays is the blue line is the amount of overdraft, with below the kind of zero line in the middle being net recharge years, so years where there was a net inflow into the aquifer, and above that zero line being net overdraft years. So the higher that blue line goes, the higher the overdraft. What you see on the bars, I know those are a little bit hard to see, but what you see on the bars is total water demand by sector. So what you can see is that there are some fluctuations in those groundwater demands over time, but you're seeing either kind of natural variation or maybe some slight increases in the groundwater demands in the agricultural sector and in the other sectors over time. So what we would want to talk about in the context of this goal is how do we respond to this information? How do we respond to this goal of finding ways to extend the agricultural economies and also preserve water for future non-irrigation uses? And part of our tool for doing that, again, is the management plan, which instructs us to design conservation programs to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. So how do we make progress toward those goals? Thank you, Maggie. So we want to make progress toward that goal, and the management plans are one of our tools for making that progress. In recognition of both that need to make progress toward the goal and also in recognition that we are entering a drier future, we are introducing some small incremental changes into the fourth management plan with the intent to use those changes to open conversations about bigger conservation swings that we can be making under the fifth management plan. So some of those updates in the fourth management plans include, so we included data updates and also new provisions in the fourth management plans. So we updated water budgets, population projections, there's new maps and updated hydrology information, and there are also new provisions in the fourth management plans around reporting and the conservation programs, and also how we are going to verify and share the data that we are collecting. Thanks, Maggie. So some of the new provisions around, in the fourth management plan have to do with data. We talk a lot about data in the context of the management plans, and it's a really important thing that informs these conservation programs. So we want to be making sure that our data is relevant and is high quality. So there are some additional reporting requirements in this fourth management plan in order to help us better analyze these conservation programs and make sure that they are moving each AMA toward its management goal. We also included an audit provision in these fourth management plans in order to verify, in order to help us verify the data and make sure that the data we're working with is good. But we want to be transparent about the data that we're collecting and our use of that data. So we're expanding on an existing conservation progress report. That conservation progress report will be published on a 3-year cycle and will include an analysis of the effectiveness of all of the conservation programs in all 3 sectors, and an analysis of progress toward the goals in all 5 AMAs. And I guess I got ahead of myself and kind of covered this slide already, but we really do intend to use this conservation progress report to be transparent about our use of this data. ADWR has been doing a lot of work recently to do a better job of sharing and communicating and improving the transparency of its data, and this is just one more piece of that effort. That we want to be communicating the success or the need for improvement of these conservation programs and of the AMAs in terms of progress toward their goals. So in terms of the specific changes to the conservation programs in the fourth management plan, you can see an overview of that here. There is also a specific overview of those changes posted on our website with the Pinal fourth management plan. So if you go to the AMA page, there's a link on the side that says management plans. You click fourth and Pinal, and in that kind of drop-down section, there is the draft management plan and also this overview. Not this overview, but a similar overview which points you to a summary of the changes that were made between the third and fourth management plans, and also the sections where you will find references to those changes. So that particular online document is a little bit more comprehensive than this one, but I'll talk through some of these changes generally now. So for cultural conservation programs, there was a change to the requirements for irrigation districts, where previously in the 3MP, there was a requirement for any irrigation districts who provided 10% or more of their water for irrigation use. Those districts would need to comply with a 10% lost and accounted for water or line all of their canals. That line regarding 10% of more of water deliveries for irrigation use has been removed for the fourth management plans, and now any irrigation districts who deliver water for an irrigation use will need to line their canals or comply with 10% lost and unaccounted for. In addition to that, we are also implementing a provision regarding adjusting the highest water duties in the AMAs, in the Pinal AMA. So there's a lot of specifics to this provision, but the idea here is that the statute allows ADWR to reduce the top 25% of water duties by up to 10% within a range of limitations. What that comes out to in the Pinal AMA is that there are approximately 11% of those water duties that get adjusted rather than 25% because the kind of list of limitations takes a bunch of those rights out of eligibility for being adjusted. In addition to that, there are some revisions to the agricultural BMP program. The idea for the BMP program, and this actually carries over to the municipal non-per capita program as well, the idea here is that we wanted to incentivize kind of the highest conservation value practices while also disincentivizing some of those conservation practices which might not provide as much bang for your buck. So we are increasing the points target for BMP farms from 10 points to 12 points, and there have been some adjustments to the point values within categories 1 and 2 of those 4 BMP categories in that program.
Ms. Mask, I'm sorry. This is Chairman Snyder. I am mindful of time here, and I appreciate the thoroughness of your presentation, but I would really like to allow council members and members of the public to ask questions and provide some input. So if we could move along, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, that would be fine. So if I may just be very general about these kind of remaining items. Similar to the Ag BMP program, there were adjustments to the municipal BMP program, both in the points targets and in the points assigned for individual BMPs. For industrial, there were 2 changes. The turf application rate for, or the calculation for application rates for turf-related facilities was changed. That's a kind of complicated thing that I won't get into right now, but that's absolutely something that we could provide additional information on. And in addition to that, the acres of turf for turf-related facilities is capped at 90 acres for more types of turf-related facilities. So previously, golf courses were limited to 5 acres per hole, which comes out to 90 acres for a 18-hole golf course. And that 90-acre limitation is going to be extended to more types of turf-related facilities, with existing turf-related facilities who are larger than that size being grandfathered in. So we can go to the next slide. So with regards to the management plans, the role of the GUAC is to, sorry, I lost my place here. Here we are. So we'll talk about the role of the GUAC here. So according to the statute, the role of the GUAC with regard to the management plans is to provide comments and to make recommendations on the management plans before they are promulgated. So that's part of what we are here for today, is to seek those comments and recommendations. Maggie, if you could go to the next slide, please. So we are seeking written recommendations from the GUAC members on this draft Pinal AMA 4th Management Plan. We are requesting that you send those questions, those comments, or any questions that you have to INAV by June 5th. I'll be, in an upcoming slide, I'll be providing a little bit of a timeline. We understand that is a little bit of a short timeline, but the idea here is that we would like to take those comments, kind of incorporate what we can from those comments, and then move forward with starting the promulgation process, noticing for the hearing in July. So if you could go to the next slide. So here's an outline of the timeline of that promulgation process. There's a lot more details that I could provide on this promulgation process, but it's kind of an extensive formal legal thing. So where we are now is we've published this initial draft. We are seeking GUAC and public comments in order that we can incorporate the comments and make kind of the reasonable adjustments that we can to this draft and publish an updated draft toward the end of June. The idea there being that we would publish a hearing notice and promulgation order in July, which would open the formal comment period. So this comment period right now is an informal comment period, really trying to gather stakeholder feedback so that we might make initial adjustments to the plan. The promulgation order opens the formal comment period, which closes at 5 p.m. on the date of that hearing. So the hearing, ADWR would present on the management plan again and obtain written and verbal comments at that hearing, and then the final adoption would take place after. We would issue findings from that hearing, and the final adoption would take place after that hearing, estimated to be around fall of this year. We are working to, as I said earlier, adopt these remaining 4th management plans by the end of this calendar year. So we recognize that this is an aggressive timeline. Just very quickly, as I mentioned earlier, obviously we will take comments on the 4th management plans in a minute here, but just very quickly I would like to mention where we are with the 5th management plans. We are also working on the development of the 5th management plans at the same time as we're adopting these 4th management plans. So in order to facilitate this process, we created a management plans work group, which is an ADWR-led stakeholder forum for the development of these plans, with goals of looking at the existing conservation program and determining what types of adjustments those conservation programs need and what new management strategies we might need to develop in order to take us into the future and find conservation in order to move these active management areas toward their goals. So if we could go to the next slide, please. As a general timeline of this process, obviously with our current situation, all things are estimated and some of these timelines might shift a bit. Our original intent was to use the 2020 calendar year to work through much of the work group and stakeholder development of these concepts for the 5th management plans. In order that we would spend 2021 drafting those plans, 2022 adopting those plans. there is a 2-year gap between when plans are adopted and when those conservation programs become effective. So this timeline is designed for those conservation programs to become effective on January 1st, 2025. We do have a number of different subgroups in order to better facilitate those kind of specific conversations for each of the specific sector conservation programs. We have been having a lot of meetings. We've been having a lot of detailed and thorough and good discussions in these subgroups. So as Carol mentioned earlier, I would just like to echo her statement on that we would very much encourage your participation in these subgroups. We definitely are seeking feedback from all of the AMAs, from all of the different sectors, from the regulated community, from the actual experts and water users in these different areas. We do have all of our previous meetings and upcoming meetings available. Information about all of those meetings is available online, and all of the recordings from previous meetings are also available on our website. So with that, I will pass it back off to you, Chairman Snyder, and I'd be glad to take any questions from the council.
Thank you, Ms. Mast. Let's move right on into questions and comments from the council in the interest of time. Mr. Collins, would you begin, please?
Yeah, one point I would make is, we got a fourth management plan that's about 331 pages long, and you want comments by June 5th. That doesn't provide a whole lot of time to do an in-depth review of that document. Having gone through quite a bit of it, I found a lot of it's reiterative. It could have been streamlined significantly to maybe 200 pages. And the third comment relates to your water quality section. It is significantly out of date, especially with respect to arsenic. That's all I have at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Collins. Again, let's move on. Ms. Guthrie?
I have no questions right now, David.
Okay. Mr. Reagans?
Yes, Commissioner Snyder, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Very good. It strikes me that the timelines that have just been presented to us present some very interesting challenges. This is the first time that the Pinal AMA GUAC has been presented with this proposed management plan. There are infinite questions to be asked about this management plan. In this webinar or virtual format, I should say, the potential for feedback is not facilitated at all. The questions that I can get into right now are going to be able at most to last for a matter of minutes. These questions really should be in public format. The number of people that would want to attend this to be able questions is very, very large. We're in a situation where we're being asked to give comments back on this in 7 days, 8 days. Also, is not being discussed when we put in these questions that we have concerning the management plan. When will the questions be responded to in another formal meeting setting to where we can decide whether or not we do wish to further with our opinions of going forward in this format, the fourth management plan as it's presently written? I see a streamlining here that is not in the benefit whatsoever of public process. And I feel that the way it is going at this point in time, it's going to be very difficult to back this because we're not working through this in public process. This has been out in draft format since the middle of March. There's been no discussion of this. There are questions that have been tried to be asked in public fashion for months. there's been the ability to have individual conversations with ADWR staff. But after those conversations are made, where does that information go? How does it get back into the process? I would suggest right now that what is being asked for, as far as the timeline on this, is not only aggressive, but it is misconstrued. We have no comments that we really can make about this plan that has basically been worked through by ADWR themselves and not had anywhere near adequate public process. But I will get into one question with Ms. Mast anyway, because it's one that I've wanted to ask for a very long time. And this includes a question concerning proposed changes to the agricultural BMP plan. I don't see that there's any problem whatsoever that there's been an expansion of points in the ADWR plan as it's been presented. That in concept is not a problem. However, when you expand points, you can actually change the values of things through their non-movement and other things having movement. In the original BMP formats, there was an understanding that the highest level of water management and thereby efficiencies in irrigation water management were achieved by 3 different practices. One being level basin irrigation, another being sprinklers, and another one being drip irrigation. They were all given the same points because they were recognized they were very similar in their irrigation efficiencies. What has been done in the current system is to put low volume sprinkler systems and put trickle systems a full 25% ahead of level basin systems. Now, for an entity that claims that they deal with data and numbers, that seems to me to be an absolutely arbitrary and capricious manipulation for no reason whatsoever. Not to mention the fact that by just stating that a low volume sprinkler automatically moves up to a full 4 points doesn't recognize whatsoever that oftentimes sprinklers are put into the ground because it's too expensive to level it or because of lack of soil depths. And oftentimes low volume sprinklers working on unlevel ground are much less efficient than level basin irrigation. It seems to me that there has been, again, an arbitrary decision to say that trickle and sprinkler is a hugely better concept than level basin when the numbers don't back that up in any fashion whatsoever. It's a major change to the way the program works. Data doesn't support it. 40 years of work by the Soil Conservation Service and now the Natural Resources Conservation Service don't back that concept. There's been no response to this, and I don't know why. So many more questions along the same fashion. But again, this format doesn't really allow the vetting of these things in public process. And the request for comments back on this in an immediate fashion, no context about how, as a group, public process meetings will be had after the analysis of the discussion points and questions asked by the committee. I have a very, very, very bad feeling that we are not adhering to proper public process in the 4th management plan for the Pinal AMA to the detriment of the water users and population of the Pinal AMA.
If I may respond to...
Excuse me, Ms. Mast. This is Chairman Snyder. This is the point where council is invited to offer comments and questions. as you stated earlier, this is a point you'll take those comments and questions, and then there will be this invitation to file more formal comments. So at this point, I have a list. First of all, I would like to say somewhat in fact, a lot in sympathy with Vice Chairman Collins and Mr. Riggins. We understand that the department is behind in its schedules. However, that should not finish deliberation and discussion. Some general comments about the document, all 333 pages of it. First of all, in terms of the mechanics of it, I agree with Vice Chairman Collins. It is way too dense and not particularly well constructed. Again, I will quote from some statements made by members of the department that with regard to the fifth management plan, the call was to, quote, keep it simple and easy to explain and defensible, unquote. And I submit to you the fourth management draft plan for the Pinal AMA, none of those things. There is a lot of cut and paste from either the Phoenix fourth management plan or from the third management plan, but it does not come together. You have a lot of different authors, and again, there's no editing. It's just pieces of narrative that's dropped in on top of one another. I would point out that we asked question in both the fifth management work groups and certainly in water discussions in the last year or so is, what's the target? What's the goal? And I would submit to you that chapter 11 of the of this draft document is probably the only chapter that even comes close to addressing those questions. Chapter 1, the introduction, is a waste of ink, in my opinion. General observation, I have to tell you that it is pretty clear to me that this document is changing, would like to change the management goal for the Pinal Active Management Area. It calls for safe yield all the way along. It's implicit in a lot of the statements that are promulgated here, and I submit to you that that's not something that a management plan is supposed to do without extensive public input and comment. Okay, getting to the critical the meat, as you call it, chapter 4. It seems focused on all water consumption versus groundwater consumption, and there is a clear difference. Chapter 4 needs a lot of work to clarify those statements in the draft management plan, and to make sure that we all know what it is that you're driving at. Chapter 5 talks about projected municipal demand numbers, but they don't jibe. Your data does not jibe. In 2017, demand for municipal use in the AMA was approximately 31,000 acre feet, and yet your other statements, your other documents, your other data points are showing that the projected municipal use is 113 to 119,000 acre feet. That's a huge jump. And the timeframes aren't there. It's somebody didn't do their homework. In Chapter 6, there's no clarity on how the sectors are performing in conservation. Plus, it's clear that the thrust of Chapter 6 is that the water utilities, both privately and municipally owned, are the ones who are now being delegated with the regulatory authority to their customers. And that, I think, is a problematic move, because the regulatory authority is the department. It is not the utilities. In Chapter 8, there's a lot of cutting and pasting in there, and it's very hard to understand. There's a lot of time and ink spent on the role of the CAGRD, when in fact the CAGRD is not really a player in the Pinal AMA. So there's a lot of work to be done, and you may take those as some preliminary comments for your consideration in advance of what the council chooses to do between now and 7 days, June 5th. If there is a brief response from the department, I think that would be appropriate, and then I'd like to go to the public and see if there's public comment.
Thank you, Chairman Snyder. So a few things. As I said, we do recognize that the timeline is short here. We hoped that some of the time between March and now may have been taken to review this document, but I understand that it is a long document. Yes, it is a long document. And granted, we do hope to make some changes to the structure of this document for the 5th management plans to make it a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more streamlined. So yes, there is a lot there. I agree with that. And we hope to improve upon that in the 5th management plans. I would like
with the 4th management plan in the meantime. That's our point.
Understood. I would like to make a small correction on one of the comments from Mr. Riggins. This is actually the 3rd time that I personally have presented on the 4th management plans to this council. This information has been provided in general form prior to this draft being published. We've been making an attempt to communicate with the council up front in order to share this information as much as possible. We know the draft just came out in March. We appreciate your comments on it and the time that you're taking to review it. But we are also trying to communicate as much as possible and get feedback from Pinal stakeholders and from the GUAC as much as possible. We have not yet determined what the next step will be for these comments. We wanted to receive the comments, see the nature of the comments in order to determine how it was that we might best respond to those comments, whether it be another public meeting or some other forum in order to best respond to those comments. So that's our next step on these comments is going to kind of depend on the nature of the comments and the volume of the comments that we do receive back. So we do hope to see those from both the council members and also from members of the regulated community, from the stakeholders. As for the BMP items that Mr. Riggins mentioned, we appreciate that feedback. we would absolutely love to see more specific feedback on those types of things, on the changes to the BMP points. Did we get those points wrong? Help us understand why. We reach out to the regulated community because we know that you all are the subject matter experts. No matter how much I study, I'm never going to know as much as someone who lives and breathes that on the ground every single day. So we need that type of feedback from the regulated community in order to make sure that we are building these programs in a rational way. Are we having a sound issue?
Jackie mentioned that everything is muted. Jackie, do you hear us now? Does everyone hear us?
I hear fine.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, we can continue. We'll chat with Jackie.
Sure. So yes, I guess the point there, and I can kind of end there, is please, we are absolutely looking for that type of specific feedback on these and the types of adjustments that we can make in order to move this plan forward for the Pinal EMA. So thank you for that.
Chairman Snyder?
Briefly, Mr. Riggins.
Yes, I'll try to keep it brief. Ms. Mast, yes, indeed, in response to your comment that some of these points have been brought forward to the Pinal AMH-UAC. That is indeed true. In general formats on working papers, they have been presented to us. And a great number of those points have been disagreed with every single time. Every time. But there have been no changes in the original concepts that were brought forward with and disagreed with repeatedly since we started. We haven't had anywhere near the ability to bring the regulated public in to group meetings so they can ask their questions. You can see the level of interest and the level of disagreement with some of your proposed amendments to the third management plan. We have a great difficulty right now with feeling that the department has been listening to the water users and the regulated community of the Pinal AMA at all. Because the very same things you started with are the very same things we still have, regardless of the disagreements that have been going on all along. So the colloquial and quaint term to use here would be a bit of steamrolling. It seems like things are said, but nothing changes. So if you all are in a position where you've already made all your decisions and you're just going to go forward anyway, I suppose that's the way it will be. There certainly hasn't been an interchange of ideas. There certainly hasn't been a working with the people that have worked here and no details and no facts and no concepts. There has strictly been, from the first day, a desire for the department to go on with its plans. And everything that you have discussed, as far as the timelines at this point, absolutely back that concept. Thank you, Chairman Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Riggins. Okay. I do want to say that I have had a brief conversation with Ms. Henningsen, and I think additional meetings, public meetings, between now and the end of July or whenever the drop dead date is, are absolutely indicated in order to fulfill the GUAC's mission, which is to represent the water community of the Pinal Active Management Area. At this point, let's see if there are comments or input from the public. Kennedy, who's lined up?
There are currently no comments from the public at this time.
Interesting. Okay. Beth, we'll now move to the call to the council. members of the council wish to address us, Mr. Collins?
Just one last comment as I've been reviewing through the fourth management plan is that it seems to me that it is kind of indicative that it's an effort to move to a safe yield without specifically stating safe yield. The other thing I'd be curious to find out is who will make the determination with respect to how long agricultural is feasible within this AMA. Is it going to be the farmers or is it going to be DWR's director? Those are my only two comments.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Collins, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it seems like we lost Ms. Guthrie.
I am back in. I went back and rejoined a second time, so I just came back on.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Ms. Guthrie, this is kind of a blend between comments on the fourth management plan and a call to the council. You have anything to share?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Mr. Riggins?
Can you hear me, Chairman Snyder?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. I would like to point out that if there was any bit of evidence that wished to be viewed, that this format virtually on these very important issues has absolutely no comments from the public whatsoever. It's seen that this format does not refer the public process and getting out in such a way to get response back. Just an evidentiary concept. Sure seems to me through this virtual system that we're working on, we need to find a way to let so many people that want to be heard be heard.
Thank you, sir. We are now at call to the public. Once again, I will ask if there is anybody who's indicated on chat that they'd like to speak or has shared any written comments.
So far, there is nobody in chat saying that they would like to speak at this time.
All right. Item 9 is future agenda items and a next meeting date. Ms. Henderson, there was reference to a meeting toward the end of June to deal with the Water Management Assistance Program grant applications.
Correct, Mr. Chair. So we are looking into, and we'll send you an email shortly here. We're looking into scheduling a meeting sometime towards the end of June, beginning of July, depending on your availability. And we hope during that meeting to hear presentations from the applicants that applied, the 5 applicants that I mentioned, or the 5 applications that applied for the groundwater conservation grant, during which you would prioritize those projects and bring that prioritization list to a DWR director. At that time, we'll also could have additional comments or discussion about the fourth management plan.
Okay. Let me ask members of the council as to travel plans. I know at least one of us occasionally goes somewhere much cooler. Mr. Collins, are you planning on taking off for the coast or anywhere exciting?
No, I was going to say, I do have a federally funded construction project in progress, and I will not be available in the mornings for the next 2 months. We'd have to be present. It'd have to be, say, in the 2 to 4 o'clock time frame.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Guthrie?
One moment, Ms. Guthrie, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I am out June 20 through June 24.
Mr. Riggins?
Yes, can I be, am I vocal, Commissioner? Good. I consider the meeting schedule of the Pinal AMA GUAC to be a paramount concern at this point in time. Fortunately, I have no travel plans whatsoever until August. There may be days here or there that could be problematic because of other meeting requirements, but I am more than ready and able to make meetings at any time. And I ask the question because I don't know it. Does the Pinal AMA GUAC have the ability to hold a public meeting that ADWR does not have time to attend?
That's a very good question. I believe that in the past, in the consideration of certainly the third management plan, there were stakeholder meetings with a very minimal attendance by DWR staff. And it was called by the GUAC and the council, many of the council members, although not all, attended and considered those stakeholder comments as they then met subsequent to that and made a recommendation to the director. Of course, those were happier times when the department actually had a Pinal AMA office. But I personally think trying to put something like that together is appropriate. But Ms. Henningsen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as a public body, there are certain legal requirements that are asked of a public body. One of them is, for example, post the agenda 24 hours in advance, take notes of the meeting, and such. I don't have all the details because I'm not an attorney, but if you want, we'll be happy to discuss that opportunity. Again, there are certain responsibilities and requirements that have to take place if there are or there is going to be a subcommittee or a committee or a meeting that has been determined by the GUAC, then that group would have to follow the open meeting laws the same as the GUAC does. So just to put that out there for consideration.
Chairman Snyder?
Yes, Mr. Riggins.
Yes, I would absolutely expect for the Pinal AMA GUAC to have a meeting that it would absolutely have to follow the open meeting laws, of course. It would obviously have to be noticed. It would have to post an agenda. It would have to do all of those things. But it appears to me that in the fashion that we're going forward, the commissioners are not getting enough time to talk about agenda items to be able to forward the process. And it seems to me that we spend the biggest part of these ADWR-sponsored meetings being told what the process is and being told where we are and being told where the plans are. But the GUAC is not discussing these things with themselves. We really haven't had the time.
I would concur.
Duly noted.
I agree as well.
I'm sorry, Ms. Guthrie, what?
I agree with Scott's comments. We've not discussed any of the content.
Ms. Henningsen, as we are sitting here in session, I respectfully request that there be an additional meeting of this Groundwater User Advisory Council for the sole purpose of considering and discussing provisions of the draft fourth management plan. And that meeting take place within the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, we noted that, and we'll have to talk among ourselves to see how we can make that work, but we'll definitely be in touch and let you know about that.
I think you may also, as you're talking amongst yourselves and considering this, that it is a unanimous request on the part of all GOAC members present.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. We are at the end of indeed, a dense agenda. We don't have a next meeting date, but we will have at least one, if not two, prior to the end of June. And we have our homework cut out for us, as does the department. I trust that there will that the comments from today's meeting from the council members will be incorporated and seriously considered by staff as they move forward with their agendas. At that point, there being no further business before the council, I declare this meeting adjourned.
Thank you all.